Wolfgang Ischinger is the head of the Munich Security Conference. He is a former ambassador to the United States. He has been working in Ukraine. I meet him here in Washington at the Munich Leaders Meeting.
Pleasure.
Back to Basics is the title of this meeting, but before we talk about the possible threats from the current White House to the transatlantic relationship, I would like to address the question, is there anything good coming out of the Trump administration?
Yes, indeed. I think we're sometimes panicking a little too easily as we discuss the transatlantic relationship. Let me give you two examples. First of all, let's talk about the hardware stuff. As we speak, early May 2025, contrary to some general expectations or indications, not one American soldier has been withdrawn from Europe, or more specifically from Germany. All the nuclear weapons which the United States has deployed in Germany and elsewhere in Europe to protect us against nuclear threats are still there. In other words, as I look at the hardware situation, NATO is, alive and kicking. NATO has even added a couple of additional members, Sweden and Finland recently. In other words, NATO couldn't be in better shape. Now, that is not necessarily just simply due to the Trump administration. I think we have to say thank you, Mr. Vladimir Putin, because by his aggressive actions, he has provoked this. But everything I've been hearing from our counterparts in the Trump administration, in the Senate, in the House, during these last couple of days, tells me that there is no desire, no intention, no perspective for the Trump administration to announce some kind of withdrawal of the United States from NATO when our leaders, including our newly elected Chancellor Friedrich Merz, when they will meet in June in the Netherlands for this year's NATO summit. I don't want to be misunderstood. I cannot rule out that they might withdraw or redeploy some soldiers, but this lingering question, is America abandoning NATO? I don't think that is really on the books. I don't think that is on the agenda, so we shouldn't panic.
Thank you. You just mentioned our newly elected Chancellor Friedrich Merz. It didn't go so well as expected. He needed a second vote. How much does this strengthen the far-right party, AfD? That is a big concern here, and everybody has been talking about that.
It's a big concern at home too, sure, for everyone. Well, obviously, this could have been a more brilliant start, no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, at the end of today, what matters is that he's been elected. And I'm sure he will be extremely angry and disappointed that obviously some of the Bundestag members of the two coalition groups did not vote in his favor, certainly not the first round, and maybe a few, not even a second round. That must be a serious disappointment for him, because it indicates that there may be a lack of discipline and maybe a lack of trust going forward. That's not good, but I think it doesn't really matter, because now he is the Chancellor, and he has a reliable Vice Chancellor in Lars Klingbeil. He has a defense minister, which is a very important position in a situation where we have a war ongoing in Europe, where we need to do a lot more in terms of the defense budget, etc., etc. Boris Pistorius is probably the single most highly regarded defense minister in recent times, both domestically and internationally recognized. In other words, I think there's a great team being put together now, and there is every possible opportunity for Friedrich Merz and this incoming government to conduct their business in a successful manner, both at the European level, at the domestic level, and even more importantly, at the international security and defense level.
Chancellor Friedrich Merz will probably travel to Washington soon and meet with Donald Trump. He has been fairly critical and fairly outspoken in his criticism about the current President of the United States. How should he approach Donald Trump?
I think here again, let's start with the good news. The good news is that, as I see it, between Friedrich Merz and Donald Trump, there is no prior relationship. They were not married to each other before, nor was he his fiancée or anything like this. In other words, there is no baggage that either one are carrying around in this relationship. This is a relationship that only starts to develop right now. So everything is possible. Maybe they will not understand each other, but there's every opportunity, and I think there's a good chance that Friedrich Merz, who has actually worked for an American law firm, who has worked for an American investment company, who is well versed in the kind of language that one speaks in Washington or in New York, at Wall Street. That's the kind of language that Donald Trump also understands. So I think there is a great opportunity for these two guys to get along. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't. And I totally agree with you. The really important thing is that Friedrich Merz gets himself invited to the White House as quickly as possible, because the world isn't waiting. The fighting in Ukraine continues. The NATO summit is only 6 weeks away. There are important G20, G7, European Council meetings coming up where Germany can sit in the back seat with Friedrich Merz now as Chancellor. Friedrich Merz will need to speak up and play a role right alongside President Macron, Prime Minister Tusk, and others in the EU. And at NATO, he needs to, play in the varsity team, as they would say, again along Macron, along Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, and others. Germany is expected by our EU and NATO partners not to hide behind others, but to try and lead or co-lead with other serious partners like France and Poland, and in NATO certainly, also with the UK, the collective effort.
How could this look like specifically? Like this promise Friedrich Merz made, Germany is back, like when it comes to the White House, when he's talking to President Donald Trump?
Well, I think there are a couple of issues where this can materialize. The obvious one is Ukraine, right? Trying to agree a redefined transatlantic strategy on Ukraine, I think there is a good opportunity that will now be possible. My impression has been that Donald Trump was dreaming for a while that by charming Putin and by pressuring Zelensky, he could figure out a way to get these two to sign some kind of deal. That apparently has not worked, and I don't see that that's going to work going forward. So I think the opportunity now is for the United States to reconsider putting more pressure on Russia, including military assistance if necessary. And that would put the United States right next to, in the same boat with Germany and other Europeans. We are we not now, if you leave out the United States, the single biggest supplier of military goods to Ukraine? In other words, we have a role to play, not only as a supplier, but also as as an actor in the diplomatic concert, which I hope will be shaped. My hope would be that a Friedrich Merz discussion with Donald Trump could maybe be a stepping stone towards the recreation of a kind of a multilateral format, rather than the United States going it alone on Ukraine, the United States going it alone on Gaza. Why don't we together recreate a well-tested and proven format, the contact group. Remember, we had these kinds of arrangements in the 1990s, very successful, to bring different actors together and to make sure that they don't work against each other, but with each other to obtain a certain solution in a crisis situation. So I hope that on Ukraine we would sooner or later have some kind of contact group arrangement with the EU represented, with, of course, led by the United States if possible, and with other important actors like Turkey, for example, as important partners. Without Turkey, there's going to be no Ukraine peace.
Ambassador Ischinger, you know Marco Rubio pretty well, Secretary of State, and also J.D. Vance. He has also been at the Munich Security Conference. They've been very supportive with the AfD and very critical with the German government and the German democratic parties in their criticism of AfD. How should Germany react to their latest remarks regarding the AfD?
Well, again, you know, as a diplomat, I'm against panic reactions. I think there is a very fundamental misunderstanding when either Rubio or Vance speaks of, you know, the German government or the German establishment destroying the AfD. I mean, the opposite is happening. The German mainstream parties have apparently done everything possible to make the AfD one of the strongest political parties. I mean, you know, cynically speaking, who actually made the AfD so successful? The failure of our establishment parties to come up with some meaningful, effective, anti-illegal migration policy, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding in America. They don't understand that even a party like the AfD gets government support money for various purposes. They are as we speak, they're trying to establish a foundation like the other parties have, et cetera, et cetera. They are a legitimate party, and the fact that they've been under supervision or observation by the agency which the German government has had does not in any way limit the ability of the AfD to do their job and to attract voters. I'm afraid, I mean, some people will say the fact that the AfD has now been labeled extremist will drive people away. I think it's quite possible that the opposite will happen, that more people will say, now I'm going to show my dissatisfaction with mainstream parties even more, and I'll join them. So I think the Vance and Rubio and others are wrong if they believe that the German government is suppressing the opposition. The opposition in Germany, including the AfD, is alive and kicking, and more so than is desirable under democratic standards. The last point, I think it's been totally ignored by our American critics that the AfD belongs to the kind of school of thought which believes there is no place for the United States in Europe. This is an anti-American party, essentially. They want to get rid of NATO. They are pro-Putin. And I'm not sure that's been duly understood here in the discussion in Washington. Maybe that's one additional reason why it's been a good idea for us to come and bring so many other Europeans to have discussions with our friends on Capitol Hill and in the administration.
However, Herr Ischinger, it's unheard of that American top politicians interfere in German elections as much as J.D. Vance, for example, did right before the German elections, or Elon Musk, who is not an official member of the administration, but is very, very influential. He has given hundreds or thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to the AfD. How should Germany react to this immediate interference in our German business?
If I remember correctly, senior representatives of the German government, also of other European partner nations, openly came out in support of and in favor of Kamala Harris last summer, last October.
Fair point, yeah.
So if we want the United States to abstain from any comment, from any effort at commenting domestic issues, we should be willing to do the same. And I want to tell you one thing. My impression has been, and I've lived in this country again over and over again for a total of 12 or 15 years. Seems to me that very often we Germans misunderstand our own identity. We behave as if we actually believed that we had a right to vote in America, because whatever happens in America is so important for Germany. So we think it's unfair that we were not allowed to vote Kamala Harris into the presidency. Deep disappointment. So I think we're overly engaged in criticizing American domestic affairs. I think the question of to what extent the White House respects certain judicial decisions is a very important issue, but not for us. This is something which the American voter, the American elite, the members of Congress and others will have to battle out between themselves. It's not something where I would think that we should get involved like in a fist fight, you know. This is worrisome. I say that as a citizen, as a friend of the United States. I worry about these types of, questioning the validity of the judicial system, of the recourse to legal protection, etc. But between our governments, between our parliaments at the official level, I think we should make a distinction between what we say about common interests or not so common interests in foreign affairs, whether it's Gaza or China or Russia or Ukraine. That's an area where we have a legitimate right to have an open and maybe even a confrontational discussion with our American friends. But I don't think that it is our job to tell America how to conduct their own domestic democracy. I don't think that we would want, and this is exactly your point, I don't think that we would want Vice President Vance or other American leaders to comment German domestic developments every day. We express resentment that he advocates apparently the AfD. I hope we can tell him over time that that is not the right way to proceed. But I wouldn't criticize him unless we start criticizing ourselves in terms of discussing domestic developments. Again, in German we have this wonderful word, tiefer hängen. Let's not panic. Let's have a discussion about it. These are issues that can be discussed between intelligent people who have an interest in their nations working together rather than confronting each other. And I think that continues to be the case between Germany and the United States.
Ambassador, one can really hear that you're an ambassador, still are. I have one last question or one last topic. Romania voted a really hard right leader. It's not the final vote, but he could become the next head of Romania. How dangerous would this be for Ukraine and for the whole concept of defending Ukraine against Russia?
Well, here again, the first point to make is, well, we need to respect, if that's going to be the outcome of the elections, we need to respect the decision by the Romanian voters. It's not our job to tell Romania how to vote. If that particular candidate ends up being the president of Romania, yes, we may have an additional problem. We already have a problem in the personality of Viktor Orban, and we had earlier serious issues with the previous Polish government, for example. So this is not an entirely new development. We will work it out. Again, I would advise against panic. But what I would suggest as a far more fundamental question, if we come to the conclusion, and there are many elements where I think we should be pushing ourselves in this direction. If we come to the conclusion that creating a more capable and more unified European Union in the foreign policy area at 27 is increasingly difficult, is maybe impossible with this kind of a future Romanian situation, with this kind of an Hungarian situation, etc., then I believe we would have a very good reason to re-examine the kinds of papers and ideas which, among others, Wolfgang Schäuble developed some 30 years ago, the idea about a core Europe. Could we, Germany, together with our classic partners in the Weimar Triangle, France, Poland, along with other interested EU members, could we maybe start a kind of a core Europe where we would actually agree that we would accept majority decisions rather than allow every single European country to veto every single decision on any day, which makes a common, credible foreign policy practically impossible? Look, I mean, I belong to a generation in German diplomacy that worked for practically 30 years to try to build a coherent EU policy on the Middle East. Long time effort. After October 7, 23, the Hamas attack on Gaza, the European Union, in terms of EU foreign policy on the Middle East, fell apart and is now just, it doesn't exist anymore. We need to restart at ground zero the effort to speak with one voice on issues pertaining to the Middle East. That is a very, very sad story. And in other words, if we can't speak with one voice at 27, maybe we can speak with one voice at 6 or 7 or 8 and demonstrate to the rest of the EU that by agreeing to speak with one voice, we, this core group, are going to be much, much stronger as the larger group which doesn't agree on anything. So
Do you see the political will in the new German government? I mean, Friedrich Merz and Wolfgang Schäuble were really close with each other.
I see an interest. I don't want to put too much in this, but I know that he has been very close to Wolfgang Schäuble. Wolfgang Schäuble was, in a way, his mentor. And I know that Friedrich Merz is a totally committed European. And I know that Friedrich Merz understands that it has now been 36 years since Germany launched a major European initiative. That was the initiative that eventually led to the euro in 89, 90, around the time of unification. So after 36 years, maybe it's high time for Germany, which always claims that we are the good Europeans. We think of ourselves as the good Europeans driving the EU forward. After 36 years, maybe the time has come to demonstrate that by launching a little piece of paper, maybe with Macron and Tusk and a few others, and see how far we can get. I think that would be to the benefit of the idea of German leadership in the EU. It would be the benefit of the EU as a whole, and it would put the EU, on the map in terms of being a global actor. So nothing could go wrong.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ischinger, for your time.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Great.